Excerpt from the Massetti Prime Gazette, translated to human units based on your location. Dear readers, what follows is less of a public safety notice. Heavens know we've had enough of those these past few weeks. And more of a description, a look into one aspect of a people's culture, rarely seen by those outside it. This week, I write about humans at war. As you are all aware, recently the entire Massetti sector was under order to evacuate, prior to the arrival of the dark spores. Those fungal beasts from parts unknown, that devour all in their path and leave barren husks of worlds in their wake. The evacuation here at the Gazette had not gone according to schedule. I wanted desperately to save all your dear letters. But my editor insisted that we leave them behind. It was as the last of the paper's skeleton crew was leaving the building that the spores arrived. It is widely acknowledged that the dark spores are widely outclassed in terms of space travel and extraplanetary combat. But despite the advantage we hold against them, we can never seem to prevent them from making planetfall, due to the sheer size of their numbers. And once the dark spores hit the ground, there is no stopping them. They rapidly multiply and germinate. Millions upon millions of their black-skinned brutes to crash over the planet, destroying everything in their path, to make way for the great digestive masses to follow. So you can imagine the fear in our hearts when we saw those first screaming black meteors crashing through the sky onto our gentle world. The mad scramble to the evacuation shuttles that followed was complete madness. And thousands of people were left behind when the last shuttle took off. Every single person in that park knew that they were going to die at that moment. What a crushing feeling, dear readers, may you never experience it for yourself. It was at that moment of greatest darkness that a single beacon of hope appeared in the sky. As the meteors fell, so too did other stars, burning brightest blue, with contrails as wide as clouds. Down onto the city, these new objects dropped, maneuvering into open areas and on top of buildings. Some were obviously shuttlecraft, others carried heavy tracked vehicles. And yet more dropped into clearings with such ferocity that I would have sworn that they crash-landed. But all were clearly military, although none that I had seen before. I was closest to one of the pods that landed hard, and as I moved over to see what or who had arrived, the doors blew open with an explosive force, and out jumped 10 fat little children from chairs arranged around the center. Except, they weren't children, dear readers. They were humans, fully grown and armed to the teeth. Their armor glistened in rainbows, too dark to describe, and was so intricately made, it looked like coils of metal wrapped around itself to create the mere suggestion of a human, instead of actually enclosing one. Their helmets were opaque and completely surrounded the head. In fact, there wasn't a single exposed part on any of them. They each carried guns that I would have trouble lifting with all 4 arms, a meter long, and made of the same black metal as the armor. These weapons were all business, although I couldn't tell what form of energy they would fire. The nearest human, after pausing to give some silent command to their squad mates, turned to the nearest person, which happened to be me. "Do you people have a safe place to stay for a few hours before more transportation arrives?" the human asked in perfect, if deep-voiced core common. I explained that most everyone here had panicked and lost all semblance of order to the evacuation. As a second and third pod slammed into the ground behind the human, the soldier paused, perhaps radioing this information along. Before too long, one of the newly arrived squads dressed identically to the first came and started to politely encourage people to move to a safer location. A moment of either investigative bravery or curious insanity swept over me, and I started jabbering about journalistic duty and staying to watch the humans fight for us. Before I could continue my improvisational rant, the first human moved his arms calmly. "Hold on there, buddy," he said. "If you can show your credentials, I can let you stay at your own risk." I quickly produced my work identification, and there was no further question of my presence among the humans that I could hear. I suppose they have their own journalists back on Earth, and being human, putting themselves in harm's way, is what they do best. So, war reporters may be a very common thing for them. They sure acted like it was an everyday request. I followed the leading human to the edge of the city, where several hundred humans had already landed and were starting to fortify their position. Landing shuttles touching down or lifting off every score of seconds. Heavy armor rolling around. Supply crates heavier than 3 of me, carried by 1 or 2 soldiers, around to staging areas. Little drones flying everywhere and venturing forward into the faraway spore clouds, gathering on the horizon. Jets, bombers, and other far stranger aircraft buzzed and zoomed into the distance, always trailing white clouds behind them. While in the relative calm of this preparation stage, I saw several humans with their helmets off. They were every shade along their race's skin tones and every variation of their facial structures, and I'm pretty sure there were nearly as many females as males. It was truly as if the entire human race had come down to Massetti Prime to defend it and buy everyone time. But before long, the clouds grew blackened and the sky grew dim with gray clouds. The humans all put their helmets on and stood at the ready. The line stretched left and right as far as I could see, wrapping around the city's perimeter where the last houses reached the plains. And for a few minutes more, there was calm. I heard the dark spores before I saw them, their howls carrying for kilometers over the tall grass. Every human standing on that line stood their position, not one wavered. I was terrified, but set myself to watch as much as possible before we were overrun, so in the slim chance that we survived, I may write it down. So, I sat near a heavy gun emplacement and hid behind some sandbags. As I was cowering, wisely taking cover, the human assisting with the operation of the weapon tapped me on the upper shoulder. "Hey pal. You're gonna wanna see this," he said and turned to face the plains. I peeked my head over the sandbags and looked out. The entire horizon was a single wave of black advancing towards us. Before I could say anything, the sky lit up brighter than I'd ever seen any vehicle or meteor. This second sun burned its way down the sky, and the gunner shouted excitedly as the light split and separated to cover the horizon. "Rods from God, bro." I turned to ask what he meant, and as I did, both eyes still facing the horizon went temporarily blind, as the lights burst to such a magnitude that I even had to close my other 2 eyes in the shade. My vision returned about the same time the shockwave hit us, which nearly deafened me. As I tried to recover, the gunners gave me some water and explained that the humans had identified the major landing sites on the planet and fired a dozen tungsten rods each, 6 meters long at each one. The resulting impacts would completely obliterate any established beachhead the spores had established in the first hours, and severely reduce the number of brutes they can field to any one position. It's so much cleaner on the biosphere than nukes. And you people never seem to understand the full potential of kinetic projectiles. The gunner said with pride, as if thermonuclear detonations were a serious option for the humans to utilize. But indeed, plasma weaponry could not hit ground targets from orbit. So, I must give the humans credit for creative use of physics in the name of destruction. The dark spores, for their part, didn't even slow or seem to notice that their entire backlines had been destroyed. They kept the charge as single-minded as before. "They're too close. I hope you're done dropping hypersonic metal on them," I asked the gunner, now torn between paralyzing fear of the spore's advancing maw and the human's orbital insanity. "Well, yes and no bro," the gunner said with a chuckle. "Yes, done with the rods. No, the fun with flying metal is just getting started." And he pointed to a small line of aircraft flying in the distance, visible only through their contrails. I watched the planes. Nothing happened. And suddenly, fire blossomed in thousands of little circles above the advancing horde. Below each circle of fire, the beasts below were destroyed, vaporized into a fine black goo. These fires traveled along the path the planes had been taking. And then I realized exactly what was happening. The planes are dropping those things. It's working. The gunner double-checked his weapon. "Right bro. But we're not done yet. Now comes the fun part. He sighted down the gun, then looked at me for a second and started pointing around the line. Claymores out in front. Those tanks have anti-personnel rounds, incendiary rounds, and the occasional surprise. Every gun here has armor-piercing and hollow-point bullets. Plus, these suits give us enhanced strength. Bro, we've got this. I had no idea what most of that meant at the time, but he said no more, and we both watched the horde slowly advance past the killing zone the planes had put down. When they closed to 500 meters, the tanks let loose with great roars, shouting with internal explosions and great coughs of fire. Out in the fields, giant lines of white-hot fire burned suddenly as the incendiary rounds exploded. The brutes didn't have the self-preservation to run around the new walls of fire, and those that went through didn't make it more than a few steps before becoming consumed by the fire, now clinging to their skin. But the tanks didn't stop. Now they were firing as fast as they could. Every few seconds they would roar with fire, and in the distance another great swath of brutes would stumble and fall to the dirt in a cloud of buzzing death. Anti-personnel shot, dear readers, is a tank shell filled with tiny balls, designed to scatter at a fixed distance, scattering the hundreds of balls at lethal velocities into the targets. There is to my knowledge no plasma weapon capable of matching the wholesale death against amassed targets. Entire avenues of brutes collapsed under the withering hail of those tiny lethal ball bearings. But still, the horde advanced on us. When they closed to 200 meters, every heavy weapon, including the one my kind gunner friends were operating, opened up at once. The wall of bodies immediately faltered, staggered, and swelled as the corpses piled up upon themselves. Then, like a great wave breaking upon the shore, the advance stopped for just a heartbeat. But then they fell over their fallen and ran forward again, each as mindless as its brothers. At this, the rest of the infantry opened up, each shot taking down another brute. And I tell you this, dear readers, there was not a single plasma weapon in use by the humans that day. Each weapon propelled some bullet, or shell, or rocket, a physical projectile designed for maximum impact at ranges that far outclass our best energy weapons, with accuracy to make you never want to set foot outside again. The humans chewed through the monsters, and the horde advanced still, meter by meter, they came closer and closer. Finally they were close enough that I could see them making leaps for the lines. And each time one got close, a small explosion went up in its face, vaporizing it into a gray cloud and black goo that coated the unfazed humans at the line. The humans held them at that range for minutes, but finally the explosions got fewer and the brutes got closer. Finally, I saw the first one breach the lines. It launched itself at the nearest human defender, jaws open, arms outstretched. But there was more to the defensive line than the humans had told me about. For the gun held by the human grew a long blade, faster than my eye could register, even as it unloaded its deadly payload into the creature's belly. The human caught the brute with the blade as it landed on him, shifting his weight to hold the beast aloft as the last life fell out of it. The armored sentinel then casually heaved the creature to the side and resumed firing. Everywhere along the line, scenes like that were breaking out. One human taking the jaw off a brute with a swing of a weapon they were in the middle of reloading. Another getting tackled and stabbing the creature with hatchets manifested from holsters as they were airborne. Directly in front of me, I saw a brute bite the helmeted head of one human already knocked prone, who casually removed a pistol from her side and emptied it into the creature's skull. She then stood up and continued firing with the pistol, a combat knife extended in the other hand, lashing out at any creature that got close enough. I couldn't look anywhere without seeing feats of strength and skill that would make any famous battle of antiquity, from any race you cared to name, look like a schoolyard scuffle. Here, a human swinging the jaw of one brute to pierce the skull of another. There, a human armed with naught but their hands and feet, taking limbs off monsters as they rolled and grappled with the beasts. Everything deafened by the great roar of the tanks, now advancing and crushing brutes underfoot as they continued to decimate the advancing horde. And still further in the distance, the planes had made multiple passes more, each destroying thousands more spores. Each time a brute got close to the weapon encampment, my gunner and friend would tear them in half with the big mounted gun, or use the smaller infantry weapons to protect me. Eventually I realized that even those humans falling down or getting hit weren't staying down. It seemed that nothing the brutes could do could pierce their armor. In fact, the only injury I saw sustained by a human, other than simple exhaustion, was when one brave soldier tackled a brute and launched both of them onto one of the few remaining claymores. The brute absorbed the majority of the blast, but the human still took some damage. Although, a bleeding arm and minor chest wound didn't stop her from picking up her knife and killing several more beasts, before a few more humans created a defensive pocket for her to retreat for treatment. How long this went on for you, ask dear readers. Well, to be honest, I don't know. The humans say it was 3 hours from start to finish. To me, it feels like it was all over in minutes or maybe several lifetimes. What I do know is that eventually the humans regrouped their line together and let their penultimate trick loose upon the horde. I thought I had seen every diabolical way of dealing death that the humans had. But apparently they were simply wearing down the horde so their cleanup crew could go to work. As one, hundreds of electronic combat drones walked forward from secondary lines that I didn't even know had been established. I was so engrossed in watching the fight. Each drone had one large machine gun of the type my friend was using, and several smaller ones, each independently aimed. And aim they did. For 3 solid minutes, the robots killed anything advancing on the line. Between this and the fire from the humans and the tanks and the bombs from overhead, the horde thinned out and finally ended. Soul Brute still ran forward unsteadily, but the worst was over. How? You ask. You see, dear readers, those human planes with the contrails. Those were spraying some chemical designed to kill the every dark spore. From the smallest individual spore to the largest brute and even their larger digestive monsters, all the dark spores were the same on a cellular level. So the humans poisoned each and every one of them before the battle even started. They had won before the first shot was fired and then stayed and fought to protect the cities and people still in danger. Several 100,000 humans landed in the Messeti system in just a few hours, and less than 2 days later, the dark spores were completely eradicated on those planets. I have a lot of questions still about humans and their way of war. How do they stay supplied with all that heavy ammunition? Do they fight in immobile lines for every battle, or only those against mindless monster hordes? How effective are their spaceships, and can they fight without all that high-tech armor? All this and more I wonder at, and yet I don't really want to find out the answer. Because I know that knowledge only comes from first-hand demonstrations. I am ever so grateful for the thousands of humans that came to the defense of the Messeti system. I'm grateful that they broke their isolationism, non-aggression, and secrecy to aid us in a very dark hour, and that they have supplied the greater galactic core with the anti-spore poison. There are questions and concerns for the future. But for now, we should all be grateful beyond words. Naturally, dear readers, my editor had already hired a new public health correspondent after assuming my death at the hands of the spores. But she graciously gave me a new job, one perhaps more suited to the new tone my column has shifted to anyway. I hope you all enjoyed reading about humans, dear readers, because I'm headed to their worlds and will be reporting on their culture from personal experience. Take heart, dear readers, for the humans fight with us. Haltil Valken, Xenoculture Correspondent, nay, Public Health Correspondent, Messeti Prime Gazette. Editor's note. Haltil was the one insisting on leaving the letters, shouting, "Leave them. Half of the idiots are asking about breakfast food," as he ran out the door. One human observer described the frontline soldiers of the dark spores as 8-foot-tall dread gorillas made out charcoal, with dinosaur spinal spines, fangs the size of your hand, and evil clouds of spores following everywhere they go. Author's name and the link to original text is in the description. Consider tapping the thumbs up and pressing the subscribe button if you enjoyed this video.